Greg Palmer lives in Adelaide and is a member of the Aberfoyle Park ecclesia. He's recently published a book through the Christadelphian, and it's available from the Christadelphian website and the Scripture Study Service. The book is entitled simply Revelation. We spoke with Greg in the last podcast and we only managed to get through the first 4 chapters of Revelation. Greg joins us again for part 2, where we delve into the section in Revelation which Christ entitles The Things Which Must Shortly Come to Pass. The jacket introduces the book as follows. Why another book on Revelation? Since the earliest days of the Christadelphian community, authors have written much on how to interpret Revelation and on the wealth of historical information that it contains, including its many connections with other parts of the Bible. For many, however, Revelation remains a confusing book, or even, sadly, a closed book. In the hope of providing simple solutions to the complex challenges that Revelation presents, this commentary is designed to be accessible to the average reader, debunking any mystery about the last message of our Lord Jesus Christ. Although it differs in some details from the thoughts of early expositors, it is intended to be a relatively simple presentation of sound thoughts from the last 250 years, assembled in a readably accessible format for the modern reader. Simply Revelation, expounded in a way that readers can easily read and understand. Again, the book's available at the Christadelphian office, that is www.thechristadelphian.com, and the Christadelphian Scripture Study Service, see sss.org.au. Greg, welcome back to Wilderness Conversations.
Thanks very much, Steve.
In our last conversation, we talked about the book, the purpose of the book, and sort of got into it a little bit, and particularly the introduction chapters, I guess. And so now we come to, I guess, the start of the bulk of the book, which is the third section, the things that are about to be or shortly to come to pass. And I noticed that Revelation chapter 4, this new section, if you like, starts with one of the visions of the kingdom.
Yeah.
Which is, I guess, a great way to start this story.
And there are, in case folks have forgotten, 7 of these kingdom visions throughout Revelation, and there's a whole lot of squabbling about 19, 20, 21, 22, which is a vision and which isn't,
right? Because
that's the time when the history being considered is actually the kingdom. So it's difficult to be sure whether it's a vision of the kingdom or a symbolic history of the kingdom.
Right.
But everyone's agreed that there are 7 visions of the kingdom. And they're punctuated throughout the significant moments in the history, I think, as much as anything else, but to give the readers, and especially those living through the history, a bit of a shot in the arm, as it were, to say, like, Jesus is coming back. There will be a kingdom. Your hope is valid. You might be undergoing challenges now. There might be persecution, whatever might be happening. But the kingdom is real. See, here's another image of it, and another one, and another one. So everybody at whatever era that reads it has a kingdom a kingdom vision within the space of their lifetime, as it were, and another reminder.
So this particular one, well, it seems to focus very much on the position of the saints during this, doesn't it? So it starts with the door opened in heaven, which is a phrase actually which we come across. I noticed this phrase, the door opening in heaven, occurring quite a few times through the book. And John's invited to come up and see something extraordinary. Come up hither, and I will show you the things which must be hereafter, which is this third section. So the door is opened, and he's taken up in spirit, and he sees a throne in heaven and sees one sitting on the throne. Again, another picture which we see over and over again in various different manifestations.
Yeah, and I think this first vision in particular continues the thoughts of the first vision in chapter 1, that the saints will be there with Christ. And there isn't a scenario in which Christ has a kingdom that he doesn't share with us. So each time we have a kingdom vision, there is, to a greater or lesser extent, information that makes it clear that those believers of Jesus who are battling the various challenges that the ages bring them, they will be there to enjoy the kingdom with him as his bride. And that's quite an important, encouraging point for us to pick up on.
Yeah, that's a great observation. The other thing I noticed was the saints are mentioned, I guess, a number of times with different representations, if my understanding is correct. So we've got Christ on his throne in verse 3. And again, multitudinous Christ, I dare say, as the point you're making. And then round about the 24 seats, they're sitting with crowns of gold. But that's not all. There's more. There's like the living creatures, and there's sort of this repetition and different. What's the point that Christ is making by sort of putting these layers of symbols representing hopefully us as saints?
Well, I think it's probably just that one symbol is inadequate to convey the whole message of what the saints will be and what they will be doing. So we have the bride, that's one symbol. We have the 24 elders. We have the 4 living creatures, and each of them has an emphasis on a different facet, you might say. The 24 elders represents the saints resting with Jesus in the kingdom. The living creatures, the active idea of the word living, represents the saints doing things on behalf of Jesus. And the bride, of course, represents the saints in union with Christ. So the various different symbols are chosen to emphasize different features of the saints.
And another interesting thing that comes out indeed in this one as well, but it keeps coming out, I think, in all the visions and through the book in general, is this emphasis on the nation of Israel. So I'm looking at, say, verse 7, where we've got the first beast was like a lion, second man, or second calf, then a man, then a flying eagle. Sort of the 4 faces of the cherubim, which takes us back to Israel, and then the reference to 12, of course. I'm thinking how significant this is for, I guess, a community of believers who are coming to a knowledge of the truth, coming to understand how God's going to work. It's post AD 70, so Israel's gone. And so here's this emphasis that although Israel no longer exists to all intents and purposes, and they weren't going to exist for another 2,000 odd years, but they're bound up in God's method of salvation and God's purpose.
Yeah, it's always been the hope of Israel, and it will continue to be the hope of Israel. And Israel is central to the purpose of God and the saints.
And then in chapter 5, we're introduced to the 7-sealed scroll.
Yeah, this is, I guess, chapter 5 is where we really start getting our teeth into the meaty bits of the history. And this is where the history really begins. This is the double-sided scroll that's sealed up, so you can't read either side.
Right, so we've got this sort of crossover from the Vision Kingdom through as it sort of morphs into the 7 seals, doesn't it? The prophecy of the events that come. So I guess chapter 5 is setting up the one who is capable.
Yeah, it's as if Jesus has said, right, this is where we're heading. Here's where we are. Here's where we're going. Now, here's how we're going to get there.
Right.
So we've done the here's where we are. We've looked at the ecclesias. We've looked at the vision of Christ holding the elders in his hand, and we've looked at the future glory of the kingdom. That's all in place now. So the natural question was, well, how do we get from here, AD 96, how do we get from here to the return of Christ? Okay, well, I'm going to take you through the history from a twofold perspective, from a political and then an ecclesiastical perspective that takes us from here to the end.
And there's quite a bit made in this chapter, in chapter 5, of the fact that no one could open these scrolls except the slain lamb. Now, we understand the importance of Christ and the purpose of God. Is that the point that's being made here, or what else is being said in that?
Well, I think when Jesus was still on the earth, he said, "Nobody knows the day or the hour, not the angels, neither the Son of Man, but the Father only." So clearly at that time, there was some information that was withheld from Jesus. There were things that Jesus did not know, that God hadn't shared with him. And I can't even begin to speculate the reasons for that. God has his own plan, and that's fine. But after he was raised, he said to his disciples, if you recall, "All power is given unto me in heaven and in earth." That suggests that he now has more understanding, more authority, as the word power means. So Jesus is now in control of things. And if listeners will understand what I'm saying here, I don't think God is doing that much himself. He's delegated it to Christ, who's now in control, and the agenda is now being run by Jesus on behalf of God.
Right. So all of the events which we're about to see that are going to be rolled out over the next, we know now 2,000 years,
yes,
are under the control and the direction and oversight of our Lord. Nothing's going to happen without his understanding, his foreknowledge, and his involvement. He's ever present.
That's right. So he now knows when his return will be. And in fact, if we just go back just a little, we skipped over much, as you had to do. But if we go right back to the very first verse, it says, "The revelation of Jesus, which God gave unto him." So that confirms the arrangement that Jesus is now in possession of all of this information. Jesus knows what's happening. God's revealed it to him. And he, in turn, is revealing it to us. So, I think when we get down to chapter 5, and the only one that's worthy to open this, that is the Lord, because he's the only one who knows. The angels don't have that information. It's just God and Christ only. And they are acting in concert. Almost, we might say they're acting as a unit at this stage. And indeed, Revelation interchanges who's on the throne. And if you said to me, "Well, I don't think that's God on the throne in that passage. You said it was God. I think it's Jesus." My response would be, I have no argument. And sometimes the one sitting on the throne is Jesus, quite clearly, and other times it's God. But it kind of cuts and swaps back and forth between God and Christ, clearly giving us to understand that Jesus acts on behalf of, as the regent of God, and everything that God now knows and does, Jesus now knows and does.
Right. And it bears mentioning John's attitude to this, because it's quite noteworthy that he's so upset that he can't open this scroll. So he has this incredible passion to understand the purpose of God and the things that are going to come to pass with the saints. And there's a real lesson there for us in terms of our attitude to the scriptures, I'm sure.
Yeah. And Daniel had that same yearning to know what was going to be.
And so it's revealed to John, and that this the Lion of the tribe of Judah is going to be able to open the scrolls, and that's what we find in chapter 6 as we have the seals unloosed.
Yeah.
So the 6 seals, they're the first part of this story that's going to happen over the next 2,000 years.
Yeah, they take us for about 225 years of history is seals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then seal 7 opens out into trumpets, and then trumpets open out into vials, and then vials into thunders. So seal 7 actually starts reasonably early in world history, but it doesn't finish. It goes all the way through to the completion of the purpose. The same way.
So this first section's quite dense. So there's quite a lot of detail for those few hundred years, and it's not that detailed through the rest of the period.
The seals and the trumpets are very dense. And then from about 1000 AD through to the French Revolution, there's precious little. So there's a kind of a reasonable gap with not so much there. And it would be interesting for people to ponder why that is. I don't rightly know, but it was the Dark Ages, and there wasn't a lot that changed until the Reformation, and that's where Revelation kind of picks things up again. So it was pretty much business as usual for the world for 500 and so years, and not a lot altered on the world front. But yeah, we've got these groups of seals, trumpets, vials, where things happen, and a lot of detail about what's happening.
The first seal is a white horse.
Yep.
Comes with the noise of thunder, and he's got a bow and a crown, and he goes forward to conquer and to conquer. These are the times just really from John's time through the next short period.
Pretty much. So it starts with a thunderclap, so a big bang that arrests everyone's attention, and that big bang and thunderclap was the death of the Emperor Domitian. Domitian was the emperor who had, as we believe, exiled John and caused the murder of many, many Christians and persecuted Christianity right throughout the realm. Something terrible. And so with the death of Domitian, the persecution of the Christians just eased up a bit, and they had a period of respite for, nearly 100 years where things weren't as bad as they had been. And that allowed the Christianity to prosper and to grow and develop much more than it had under the reigns of Nero and Domitian, the earlier emperors that were very vigorous in their persecution of Christianity.
So it goes from 1896, which we think is about the time that John's writing this, through to 183. And then we've got the second seal, which is the red horse, which has a completely different sort of flavour to it, doesn't it? Yeah. It talks about taking peace from the earth and killing one another, and he had a great sword.
Yeah, so the great sword is interesting. It's a Thracian sword, and that helps us with the history. But there was so much unrest in this period, as the red horse suggests, and throughout this period, which was probably 20 years or so, emperors came and went. Rome was a very violent place. The political scene changed quite dramatically within sort of days, weeks. And there are some historians that say every day 2,000 people were killed in riots and civil unrest. And
it was almost the failure of civilization, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It's sort of a complete breakdown of rule.
That would have been a very challenging time to be living in Rome.
Mm. The third seal, 212 to 235. This is the black horse.
Yep.
And he has a pair of balances in his hand.
Yes.
And he's weighing wheat for a penny and 3 measures of barley for a penny, speaking about difficult times as well.
Yeah, now, this is where I think Revelation can be so utterly intriguing, the way that the symbols match the history. So in this time, the emperor, who was Caracalla, brought in some really harsh fiscal policies, increased taxation, and just made things go bonkers for the average labourer and the farmer. So people said, well, it's not worth working. It's not worth farming. And in the inflation that ensued, things were so expensive. Your wage didn't even cover the cost of your food. So how can you sustain that, let alone anything else? It didn't even buy you food. So the average person couldn't afford to eat. So the farmer would go to sell his crops, but people couldn't afford to buy them. So farming became unprofitable. And the farmers were obliged to pay whopping taxes to the empire. So the emperor said, no, we've got to protect farms. If you destroy trees or vines, you have a very harsh punishment, which is death. And at the end of verse 6 of chapter 6, it says, hurt not the oil and the wine. And they made a law that says you can't destroy these fruit trees. It's just amazing how the symbols and the history dictated by Christ and seen by John, it's just amazing how it's literally come to pass.
Incredible detail.
Yeah.
The fourth seal, a pale horse. So I think this is you're suggesting 235 to 300, so it's about 70 years.
Yep.
So this is obviously a pale or a white horse, and sitting on this particular horse is a rider whose name is Death and Hell, and power was given over them and over the fourth part of the earth to kill with the sword and with hunger and with death. So again, more punishment on Rome.
Yeah, so this pale horse, the Greek word there is chloros, from which we get the chlorine. And it's that pale, sickly green colour. And when you look at someone who's that colour, you think, oh, they were an awful colour. They sort of went all green and they fainted and they were all they're like death. So it's giving us to understand that this is a period of tremendous death. And it was death of the emperors and it was death of the people. So where it says that the rider was death and he had the power to kill with the sword, I believe that refers to the plague of Cyprian, which killed 5,000 people every day from about 10 years from 249 AD. So not only the emperors, but ordinary people. This was a very desperate time in the Roman Empire, and thousands of people were dying every day. You can imagine how, as a result of these previous two horses, the black and the pale, the Roman Empire suffered tremendous monetary and personnel losses and was really struggling to hold it together.
Yeah, so it's on its knees.
Yeah.
And so it's right at this time where the barbarians start to invade. And is that the reference, like right at the end of the verse, it says, and with the beasts of the earth?
Yes, that's right. So the wild animals, that's the Europeans from up north, the Germanic tribes, the Huns, the Goths and the Vandals and etc. coming down. So yeah, that's exactly right. They sort of opportunistically seized the moment when Rome was on its knees and started attacking.
The fifth seal's quite different The fifth seal is souls under the altar, and it says, "When I opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar souls of them that were slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held." So very different flavour, this one.
Yeah, it's a reminder to us that while Christ has been busy sort of navigating through history and arranging affairs, he's not been unmindful of all of those brothers and sisters who had died, those who yet would die in his name. And he heard their prayers, and, God and Christ together had a plan. And he says, well, look, we've got this under control. You will get the white robes of righteousness. You just need to rest. And maybe that's rest in sleep, as we now know it to be, or rest patiently that we've got this in control.
So is this seal, do you think are they general words for the whole period, or was there a particular period where the saints that this is particularly referring to?
I think it's particularly talking about Diocletian's persecution of the Christians. Nero started persecution off, really. He was the pioneer of Christian persecution. Domitian was pretty bad as well. Claudius was no better. But Diocletian, he made it an art form. If you looked like a Christian, you could be murdered. If you looked like you had sympathy with Christians, your tenure on the earth was doubtful. So,
so it was open season on the Christians in the Roman Empire.
And it lasted for about 10 years before Diocletian passed off the scene, and Galerius changed the laws and said, well, look, Diocletian tried to make everyone return to paganism. That clearly hasn't worked. So rather than just keep killing people every day for being Christian, maybe we need a different policy. And that's what Rome tried. But right through that period, and particularly in the period of Diocletian's reign, Christ is saying, look, your prayers have been heard in heaven, and there will be a response to this. You guys just need to trust that God and I have this in control, and your place, as it says in verse 11, of being given white robes and of rest, that's assured. Yeah, it's a very positive seal for the Christians, even though it was a very, very negative time.
Well, the sixth seal is the first of these great earthquakes. And behold, when he'd opened the sixth seal, there was a great earthquake. The sun became black. The moon became as blood. Stars of heaven fell to the earth. I mean, this is a monumental event that's happening here in the sixth seal.
This is a really big change. We haven't considered or thought about what was happening to Christianity in the meantime, but let's just talk about that, because it kind of pops up later, but it's been developing all the while. Christianity has been losing its way for the best part of 250 years. The apostasy which the apostles Peter, John, and Paul wrote of and said, we're warning you about this, Acts 20 to Ephesus, and, their letters saying, look, you need to be careful about this. Well, that apostasy just continued to grow and to strengthen, such that Christianity by the beginning of the 4th century wasn't the same as Christianity of the 1st century. And there were many things that were different. And I think it might only have been natural to avoid the harshest persecutions. We'll blend in a bit. So there had been significant blending of Christians with pagans, and ideas were interchanged and swapped, so that when we get to the beginning of the 4th century here, we just need to realize that there are two groups of Christians now. There are those who remain true to the teaching of Christ and the apostles, and those that had wavered a bit and corrupted the message and the practice. So Constantine enters as a ruler in Rome, but it was a really challenging time for the Roman Empire, because there were several pretenders to the throne, and it was by no means clear that Constantine would be the one that would unite Rome and rule single-handedly, which is what turned out to be. But there was one particular battle, the Battle of Milvian Bridge, which was the sort of turning point in that history that put things well and truly in favour of Constantine. And previously there'd been, little wins and some losses but this was the big moment that swung things in favour of Constantine being emperor. And on the eve of that battle, the night before, he apparently saw what had become the Christian symbol, Chi Rho, represented by the fish, and you might see cars with fish stickers on the back of them. That was a symbol that was adopted reasonably early on by Christians, not necessarily by those who remain true to Christ. But it's not an especially objectionable symbol to me. Some don't like it. But Constantine said he saw this vision, and the dream said, if you embrace this, you will conquer. So fly this flag and you'll be fine. And he did. And he won that battle, which was a turning point. So he said, right, so Christianity is it then.
Right.
The empire is going to be Christian. But the problem for Constantine essentially was there were a significant number in each camp, and as a politician, you can't afford to alienate either group because they're now too large. And the Christians, having lost their roots, participated in politics and weren't separate. So you couldn't ignore them as a political entity. So it's from here on in that there's a significant welding of the two into sort of one branch, if you like. And it's here where Christian symbols were adopted, pagan symbols rather, and pagan feasts were adopted as Christian. So yeah, a big change. Paganism in the Roman Empire was essentially banished, and Christianity took over, but not Christianity as the apostles taught. So you might notice that the end of that seal is 324, and it was the Council of Nicaea in 325 that arranged for the Trinity to become accepted church doctrine. And the Trinity is perhaps the granddaddy of all wrong teachings of major Christian faiths.
So this sort of establishment of Constantine and his new Christian politic was really the formal setup of the apostasy, wasn't it? From then on, the apostasy was well entrenched in the political world.
Yeah, it really started in earnest from here on in, but it had been growing.
It had always been there.
Growing.
Yep.
Brother Thomas makes the interesting and I think perfectly credible assumption that the apostasy It was a woman who gave birth to the apostasy, we later discover, and the woman, being the true bride of Christ, having prostituted herself or been unfaithful in some way or other, was now pregnant with a child that didn't belong to Christ. And the gestation of a pregnancy roughly corresponds to the number of, if you make it in days and convert that to years, the number of years from the early days of the apostles till now. So it's this incipient wrong teaching and practice that gradually gained momentum, and the apostle says, well, we can see evidence of it, and it's already here and it's starting to work. And then that was in the 60s and 70s, and then it gained momentum through the 2nd century and then the 3rd century, and now it's here in all of its full-blown corruption as a illegitimate child of the ecclesia, as it were.
And so it's right in the middle of this. We get to chapter 7, which is a step away from the seals, I guess, in a sense.
Yes.
Because we get this, we get 4 angels standing on the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth or the sea. And then we move into these servants of God, the true servants of God, which are sealed in their minds and so on. Is this one of the visions of the kingdom, chapter 7?
Yeah, it is. But it's okay. The colour of this vision is directly in response to what's just happened. So in the last seal, there in chapter 6, there's all this uncertainty about Christianity now. It's changed its flavour. It's now Roman. It's now this. It's now that. But we're going to mark out that there are true servants of God, and they've got a badge on them, if you like. We can identify them, and it's important to realise that God knew who they were, and we can see who they were down through history, and they were marked out as being different.
Yeah, so there's this contrast between. So it's almost making the point that just because now the Roman Empire is Christian, it doesn't mean that these are the saints of God. They're a different group of people. They've got this characteristic. They've got God's name in their forehead, and they're described as 144,000, which is 12 times 12. They're related to the hope of Israel, etc. So there's this contrast between what's happening in the 6th seal, in the sense of the Christianization of the empire, and what's happening in the true ecclesia.
And it's important to realise for readers to notice that symbols aren't necessarily consistent all the way through, because things change. So whereas the woman has represented Christianity, true and false, up to this time, now that the whole empire has gone Christian and it's gone bonkers and not true Christian, the church, the Catholic Church, is not spoken of as a woman anymore. She loses that title, and she now gets the title of a harlot or a false prophet. So the badge of honour as being potentially a bride of Christ, which is what the ecclesia ought to be in prospect, being a faithful woman, Christianity loses that because they've not been faithful to the teachings and practice that Jesus gave us. So, these 144,000, they are the saints, in contrast to what are now the nominal Christians. It's
an incredibly encouraging chapter with these saints, 144,000 sealed in the foreheads. They're wearing white robes. They've come out of great tribulation. They've washed their robes, and they have this reward that they're sitting on the throne, and I will dwell among them, says Christ. It's an extraordinary chapter.
Yeah, it's one of those really encouraging visions. And it again emphasises the connection with the hope of Israel.
With that sort of inserted picture of, or a vision of the future, which is inserted for the readers, for the saints of the time, we then go back in chapter 8, back to the 7th seal and finish off the seals, which, as you say, open up then the trumpets. So chapter 8 says, and when he'd opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about the space of half an hour, and I saw 7 angels which stood before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. Yep. So now the seventh seal introduces the 7 trumpets.
And the difference between the seals and the trumpets is the seals are pouring out God's judgments upon pagan Rome. The trumpets are pouring out God's judgments on Christian Rome.
I was going to ask that question because you could have 12 seals, just instead of having trumpets, and you think that's why, because of this, it's the great earthquake is there now.
That's the division. The earthquakes happened, and before were the seals, after the trumpet.
Right. This space of half an hour in heaven.
That's a really tricky one to get your head around, and it's probably not the place to find and go through it now. I've got a bit in one of the appendices about that.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Suffice to say that it works out to be almost 15 years, and there's a big chunk in Eureka that goes through about 3 pages worth, sort of unpacking why that is. Periods in Revelation are usually interpreted by the day for a year principle, and sometimes by applying that principle in several different ways.
Now, this introduction into the trumpets is interesting because before we get into the trumpets, which I guess kind of start in verse 7, we have, it's not the same vision, but it's similar encouragement, or I guess it sets the scene for the trumpets, because we've got this reference to the saints, and it's not just the saints in general. We've got them. An angel has a golden censer. He's got much incense, and he offers it with the prayer of the saints. And the smoke of the incense, which came with the prayers of the saints, ascended before God, and so on. And we've got these verses which, if you like, set the scene, I guess, and almost tell us why the trumpets are happening. Is that a fair statement?
That's absolutely correct. And the judgments on Rome in the 6 seals, and the judgments on Rome in the trumpets, as well as the judgments on the church, the Roman church, in the vials, they're all in response to its treatment of the saints and the prayers which the saints had made to be avenged. And so, as they were persecuted, they prayed to God for their persecution to end and for some justice. And God's saying, well, I'm hearing you and I'm working and I've got this plan, and it's all there. And you just need to have faith and patience.
So the angel takes fire from the altar, which is the altar where the prayers of the saints are coming from. So we've got this connection, and casts it on the earth. And so we have the trumpets. The first trumpet is a fire that was cast upon the earth, and a third part of the trees were burnt up, and the grass was burnt up.
Yeah. The first trumpet represents the Goths under the hand of Alaric. And when it says a third part of the trees were burned up, and the Roman Empire by this stage was in 3 parts, and this is the results of this first trumpet basically took out one part of the 3, which is the Italian third, if you like. So Rome itself.
Is there essentially East, West, and then North Africa? Were they the 3 parts? Or is it a bit more complicated than that?
It's a little more complicated than that, but yes. Yeah. So the first trumpet took out Italy. The second trumpet, which was the Vandals, took out North Africa and Spain and all of that. And the third trumpet, which is Attila the Hun, that took out the Eastern Empire. So between them, the first 3 trumpets took out East, West, and South. And Rome didn't extend north very far. That's where these Goths, Vandals, and Huns came from.
And you make the point in the book that the Spirit uses natural disasters to symbolize the first 3 trumpets, but it changes in the next ones.
The next trumpets, the first 3 were described as wind trumpets. wind being a natural element. And the next ones are called woe trumpets, because when they were announced, it was bad news always. In fact, worse news. So the first 4 trumpets, did I say 3 before? I meant to say 4. The first 4 trumpets are wind trumpets.
Right. So the woe trumpet starts in verse 13,
which is the starts in verse 13. Yeah.
Right. Yep.
And with the proclamation from the angel saying, "Woe, woe, woe."
So would it be fair to describe? So the 3 woes are special trumpets, the slightly different trumpets. They're called the woe trumpets. Yeah. Well, nominally called the woe trumpets.
And they basically are more intense persecution than the first 4. Yeah, so the first of those woes is the 5th trumpet, and essentially this is the beginnings of the Islam movement.
Right.
With
so would it be fair to say the first 4 trumpets mainly focused on destroying Rome in the west? You've still got Constantinople, which is strong and ruling from there, but we're about to find out, as you say, the Islam influence.
Yeah,
and
they were particularly interested in cleansing the Holy Land from what they saw as faithless Christianity, and in getting rid of Christianity per se, which was now the religion of the Roman Empire. So that the Islamic rule under the caliphs, that was attacking Christianity, not Rome per se, but Christianity. Of course, Rome is together with Christianity at this time. The Roman Empire had Christianity as its official religion, so it attacked Rome by default, I guess, but it was really attacking Christianity. And that was its beef.
So the star that falls from heaven at the start of chapter 9, which is the 5th trumpet, is Muhammad, who heads up this new, what becomes a religion, but also an army.
Yes.
Who's doing this fighting against Christians.
Yeah, that's right.
They're described as having smoke like locusts on the earth and giving power as scorpions.
Yes, so those images together are just amazing. The Saracens, which is the army of the Islamic religion, they had a thing called Saracen fire, which basically was a combination of tar and gunpowder held together in some way that they catapulted or trebucheted, I'm not sure which, across walls. And it was basically like an incendiary bomb. So you think of, scorpions stinging you and burning, like the burning pain of a sting of a scorpion. Well, I think that's what we're given to understand, that the effects of these guys were just something new and terrible. And there were just thousands of them. The word in Greek is myriads. There were just so many of them. There was like this horde just eating up everything in its path. So I think that the 2 images there are quite interesting.
There's quite a lot of detail, isn't there, in this chapter? There's 6 or 7 verses of very colourful symbols that sort of go into quite a lot of detail about the sort of army.
They sort of match what was happening. The descriptions of the army match. The descriptions of the rules of engagement match. It's very precise stuff. Even the descriptions of the time period is just amazing, to the day. That time period that is given is accurate to the day. It's just absolutely stunning.
So this is the tormenting for 5 months.
But moving down to the second woe in particular, it's even more precise than that. It says an hour, a day, a month, and a year, and that all calculates out to 391 years and 30 days, which is just exactly the period. So there's a precision in these judgments from firstly the Saracens and then the Tartars and then finally the Mongols that were just amazing.
So the Tartars are the sixth trumpet. So we're really moving along in the years where the year 1062 through to 1453.
Yeah. So the Saracens didn't destroy the Roman Empire, and neither did the Tartars. They basically decimated it, took Constantinople, which was the capital of Rome, and brought an end to the Roman Empire as it was then. And politically, the Roman Empire shifted up to Moscow, and religiously, it went back to Rome.
Another description of this flooding of these huge armies is the loosing of the river Euphrates. So the four angels which are holding the river Euphrates back, it says that it's loosed, and so we get this image of this flood. Yeah.
And it literally would have been like that, I think, just troops from the east just flooding across into the Eastern Roman Empire and just causing havoc.
And this becomes significant, obviously, later in Revelation, where this is reversed.
Yeah.
So this speaks of the eventual fall of the Byzantine Empire.
It does, yes. And that's really, really interesting. I mean, I've read entire books on that, which is just so interesting, and I gave it about a paragraph, I think.
There's a whole story to be told there.
There is a whole story to be told there.
Certainly a fascinating city, Constantinople or Istanbul, and the history there is extraordinary, no doubt.
Yeah. Essentially, the trumpets are judgments on Catholic Rome, and the vials are judgments on the Holy Roman Empire.
And so then in chapters 10 and 11, we have, I guess, more... part of it's a kingdom vision, but we have this interesting, first of all, in chapter 10, this rather interesting reference to thunders, which we're not privy to. It's curious, isn't it?
Yeah. So the having sort of got to the end of the trumpets, we now have another vision of the judgments of God. This time at the hand of Christ and the saints. So it's now the millennium. It's Jesus together with his saints. So it's another one of those kingdom visions to say, well, guys, we know this is tough, and the judgments on the Roman Empire have impacted everyone. The persecutions are hard, but look what's coming. Gentile times are going to close. The Roman Empire and the Roman Church will be destroyed, and the kingdom of God will be ushered in. So hang in there, guys. You're doing it tough, but you're doing good. And you just have to trust that the Father and I have this under control, is effectively a modern paraphrase of the intent of Jesus' words, I think.
And so the thunders then represent judgments on it after the return of Christ.
After the return of Christ, yeah.
It's interesting that it's sealed up and we can't get information on this. And I guess there might be all sorts of reasons for it. One is maybe we don't need to know. But later in Revelation, we actually do get a bit of detail around what's going to happen to...
Yeah, they kind of get opened a little bit.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we're not given much information about the thunders. The thunders will be judgments against Catholic Europe after the return of Christ. And Revelation 17 and 18 are sort of principally the fleshing out the detail of that.
So we move on to Revelation chapter 11, which you've entitled The Witnesses of Christ.
This chapter introduces a whole period of witnessing that nominal Christians, together with the saints, witness against the Catholic Church. And from the very earliest times, both the true brothers and sisters of Jesus and some other Protestant faiths have got together and said, no, the church isn't right. The Protestant witnesses do so in a way that the true witnesses of Jesus would never have done. by agitation, by riot, by violence, by civil disobedience and unrest. But the true brethren and sisters continue to witness as well. But these witnesses here in Revelation are essentially not the true Christians, but they're two classes of witnesses, because it says there's two witnesses.
So this idea of witnesses, it's almost like a court of law where these people are proclaiming
this is what they did.
That the Catholic Church is...
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And the two classes of witnesses are essentially political and religious. So it's that same theme, again, that we've seen pop up in the book. So some of the objectors are saying the church has corrupted the teaching and it's not right. And others are saying the church has taken over and it's turned into an empire and it's a military thing and that's not right.
And it's politically corrupt as well. It's religiously corrupt and politically corrupt.
Politically corrupt. So there's two different groups, and some of the witnesses were emphasizing the political corruption and some the ecclesiastical corruption, which is why there's two witnesses.
And is this period of the witnesses a particular point in time, or is it a general statement of what's happening over an extended period of time?
Both. It starts almost as soon as the Catholic Church commences in earnest with Constantine.
Yep.
And it continues for 1,260 years. Yeah,
so that's why you have a reference to this quite long time period early in the chapter.
But it's not the same group of witnesses all along. If you had a quick glance at Appendix 5, I've detailed briefly there the organisations and their names and their structures of those groups from the earliest of times who witnessed against the Catholic Church for one reason or another, and how they did it. So they didn't all last for 1,260 years. Some of them lasted for a fraction of that time, some for several hundred years. But from the earliest and successive groups taking over, the period of the anti-Catholic witnessing lasted for 1,260 years, which takes us through to death of the Huguenots in the massacre in France on St. Bartholomew's Day.
And so this also, right at the end of the chapter, is our next great earthquake. In verse 13 of chapter 11, the same hour there was a great earthquake and a 10th part of the city fell.
Yeah. So the 10th part of the city now refers to one of the 10 major supporters of the Roman Empire, which in this case was the nation of France. So France was one of the 10 principal nations within the Holy Roman Empire. And as a result of the French Revolution, it collapsed, basically, and the church got kicked out. So as far as the Roman Emperor, the Holy Roman Empire was concerned, France was lost. And it's never really got that back.
And so this great earthquake of chapter 11, verse 13, we're going to see is the French Revolution.
Yes.
And so verse 14 says, the second woe is past, and behold, the third woe comes quickly. The third woe is the seventh trumpet, which then opens up into the vials, as we're going to find in the subsequent chapters.
That's right. But in the meantime, Revelation will take us back through the history, and we'll go over all that political history again and see the development of Rome and the church from an ecclesiastical perspective. That is, what did it believe? What did it do? How did it treat the saints? And what's happening?
That sounds like a great spot to end our podcast, and we might take the opportunity to take a break and do a third podcast where we can look at the second part of this last part of Revelation. So, Greg, thanks for joining Wilderness Conversations.
Not at all. Thank you for having us.